It's Absolute Zero and RJ Knight, and we are back for another session of Absolute Questions and RJ Responses. And today we're going to be tackling a few questions that I had for RJ regarding the topic of esports. So I'm going to start this one off with quite a doozy. It's quite a big question, so I'm just going to throw it out there. We see esports has grown in popularity over the last few years. One of the most popular video games, League of Legends, has a user base of 64 million people worldwide, and it we've seen a lot more tournaments, a lot more professional players, a lot more professional leagues rising up. Um, Seeing the the competitive nature of it, does this have does this does this rise in esports mirror rises in traditional sports like American football or basketball into like a more popular mainstream awareness, or do you think that esports is radically different, or it breaks away from those and has unique, challenges it'll face, I guess, to try and get, as big a popular reach as traditional sports?
All right, that's a huge question, and there's a lot of problems with the question. And one of them is that you have to define whether it's even a sport.
Oh snap, he went there.
Um, and then you're comparing it to traditional sports. There's just so many sports, and they're kind of different, and there's a lot of them that are not even popular.
Mm-hmm.
uh, and some become popular later. So that's just really huge, and there's a lot of like human variables that I could actually talk about, but it just would be too big. It would have to be a series just on that in itself, which I could do. Um, but first of all, people like the word sport because it's popular. It's like people like certain words because they have a certain weight, and they're known, or they feel this word is more powerful than another word. We implicitly do this all the time. People call molestation rape, and all with microtransgression, all kind of stupid stuff like they because the word rape is more powerful than the word molestation, right? We say a lot of things are racist because this word is more powerful than just saying prejudiced or something like that. So we use certain terms because they're powerful. I know I'm using a negative connotation, but I'm using those because they're easy to understand. So we're calling things sports that are not sports, right? Like cycling and okay, like bowling is not a sport, or
Well, why
like
isn't it a sport?
or like let me put it like this: racing is not a sport. Like that is not a sport. There's games, right? There's games, and games are very similar to sports, but they're games. They're not like sports.
Okay, so what constitutes a sport?
That's a little difficult, but like because I'm gonna give something very general, so I don't go on. But like games, you can play by yourself, or you can play with people, right? Games, um, like let me put it like this, because I'm trying to think of a way that could not like I could answer this concisely. Like when you race, you run, you're playing a game or you're doing a game. You could beat your own time or beat your own score. That's a game. So track and like other like games, like events and stuff are like games. I can't think of one off my head right now. Well, because we talked about this, but you gave me some idea. Like we were bouncing like names off, but different types of activities, and I can't really think of. I don't know. I'm drawing blanks. Chess is closer to a sport because you could like block people, and like you could react to what someone's, you could block them. Like you can't really play chess by yourself. You have to play it with somebody else, and you could like block and react to somebody. You know, you see what I'm trying to say?
Mm-hmm.
Like all these other things that you can't do that. It's a game. Now I know you might say, well, in esports you can do that, but there's also a variable within inherently within a sport that it can't not be made up in a game, because like electronic game, because in those it depends on the type of game. So the electronic games that simulate chess are closer to a sport, but games that simulate real uh, human or Homo sapien behavior, they don't work. And the reason why they don't work is because there's human variables that are taken to and that into play, not just athleticism, but skill, and also not just skill, but also intelligence towards the game and just general intelligence. There's a lot of different factors that go in that are not equal. But one of the things in the game is equal is all of the people's skills are equal. Not skills, I mean the physical ability of the characters or certain other things are equal. In the real world, no two guns are ever equal or any of these things are equal. You
Yeah,
see what I
that's true.
mean? So there's all these inherent variables that you cannot account for at any given moment in real sport that make sports dynamic. And 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 as people compete and block and react and figure out new ways to deal with each other, in esports you do not have that same level of variable of you don't have those same
Variability.
variables. Yeah, I'm thirsty. I need water actually. So you don't have those same variables, and it's just it's hard. It's harder, right? My mouth's sticking to me. I'm really like thirsty. And that's why it's like it's more of a game. We used to just call them games, right? That's what we just called them not long ago, and we changed the word down to sport. And I'm not saying that they're very good games. They're very competitive games, right? They're games you could have competitions in and tournaments and stuff, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a sport.
Okay. But so even if the game is very player versus player rather than like a player versus environment, just to be clear, that doesn't necessarily make it a sport.
Could
It
you give me
needs
an
to have
example of what
enough.
you're saying?
Okay, so like something like speed running, right? Is competitive. It's like where you take a game like Mario and you try and get the best time. You're playing versus the environment, and there might be some changes, but it's relatively static. You could practice by yourself and it would be the same. Like you don't have to react to like another physical person. But, I was going to say a player versus player game or a PvP would be something
Getting
like
closer to a sport.
Counter Strike or something, right?
Those
Where
are
you
getting
have
closer to sport.
okay,
They're
but they don't bridge
no to
that gap
me.
for
There's
you.
some
Okay.
things that are inherent to real sport that you just can't get in these digital sports. Now I'm not saying that it can never be bridged. Like I've heard people say you could never make electronic game into a real sport. Okay, no. Once we get real VR, then it'll be no different from reality. And all those variables will
Okay.
be implicitly taken in, and yes, that's fine. But even if you want to take like, yeah, but motion sensors. Okay, when I use those motion sensors, they cannot keep up with my movements, my reactions, and the way I do things. So you play boxing games or kickboxing games, I actually know how to kick and punch properly. It doesn't keep up with me. I punch a little bit different, like because my techniques are not the same as the orthodox standard techniques that people use. They're actually efficient techniques that are meant to be used for specific reasons, like in the proper martial context. Most people don't do that. Like in sport, you're taught to like kick a certain way and stuff like it's a little different. So it doesn't even pick those up because it has predefined ranges that it has set in values to like this is where it hits here. So it's so limited right now that you can't even have that. And I had to use that as an example because I couldn't really like think of another one where with motion sensors. So even when I'm like reacting and stuff, if I put on a VR, it cannot keep up with my reactions like the way that I react because it doesn't have all of those variables inputted in. So like when I dodge, I'm very good at dodging, as you know, like you're punching at me. I'll slip just enough or a certain way using certain foot techniques. I can't do that. The game doesn't know that or picks that up. So it
Yeah.
does it there's variables that are going on. There's a lot of dynamics that happen in games. I mean, inside sport and in games that it can't do. So a limited game where you have like say that's closer to chess. Chess type games are the closest games to sport that are not like traditional. Does that make sports?
Yeah.
Like they're closer. They're far closer. So it depends on the type. But
Yeah.
like even if we're talking about where we are with like that motion sensor technology, it's just there's inherent problems in there. Do you see what I mean? Like we're such a big gap before you get a sport, and then if you're gonna invest billions and trillions of dollars into getting something that to that level, which is gonna take, oh my gosh, it's gonna take. Okay, let's be pragmatic about this. Why don't you just play real sports? Because what's the point of me using motion sensors and running around to use skills that I had to learn in real life when I just do it in real life?
Well, maybe you could like, I don't know, theoretically put people on a fair playing field. I don't
How
know.
can you put them on a parent film field when inherently in sport no one's on the same playing field? If you do that, it's not sport.
Okay. Okay, I got you. I got you.
We make rules to normalize sports to like, yes, we do equalize the playing fields to some degree, but it's never equal. If I go in a
Okay.
boxing ring with another dude, like we don't even enforce that in boxing like that because if I go into a boxing ring and let's say I'm 140 or something and this guy comes at 140, he could like balloon up to like 145 or 150 depending on the guy like right before the fight. Like there's so many factors like he doesn't dehydrate well but I dehydrate better like better than him. You know what I mean? Like
So it's a level of complexity that it's like it that it hits and then it's a sword. Like
yeah,
that.
there's
Okay.
just variables that affect competition. There's is never inherently equal, and skill you need over skill to come to make up that gap sometimes. So we try to
Yeah.
equalize it for rules, and the reason why we do that is so we can have repeated competition and no one dies. But you have sports where people die. It's not an implicit rule that you can't have a sport where somebody doesn't die, right?
Yeah.
But in order for money and legal reasons, and as modern as people became more civilized, we just took those things out. But that
Yeah.
doesn't murder doesn't necessarily. I mean, oh gosh, I'm thirsty again. Murder doesn't stop something from being a sport,
Yeah.
right? Like at all. Like I've heard people make that argument, like, oh, you can't have murder. It's like, but you can have almost murder. Like,
Yeah, I
okay,
mean,
like
I think
you could
someone
have like
dies
paralyzation. Like, come
every
on.
year playing football. Like one person, like I think is the average death for football.
Yeah, so it's a little silly. So, but those are the reasons why. So I think these are e games, but e games don't sound as good as esports. Esports is far more marketable than the term e games. So, but I don't think it's a sport.
Okay.
Like I think if like civilization and like these Age of Empires and these other games are have more factors in common with sports.
Okay. I, I get where you're coming from. I get where you're coming from
StarCraft
undoubtedly.
stuff is really close to a sport. You could very much you could it's a strong argument that you could make an argument for that as a sport, but I don't play it. But like I said, once you start getting to like
Yeah,
chess
and
like
like
games, it's or like even if it's
yeah,
a real time, it becomes harder because
yeah,
there's inherent variables with how people deal with pressure in the moment and this and you know
yeah,
all those
yeah,
dynamics of
definitely.
a sport like come into play, and so you take out the because you just remove the athletic medium, right? So that dimension of athleticism, you remove that, but now you're dealing with mental aptitudes, and that's a whole nother dimension in and of itself. So you stress that even more. It's not as complete of a sport as let's say like basketball or football or something like that, but right, like it's still a sport. Like I'm gonna tell you right now, golf is not a sport. Okay, me hitting a club and walking up and down and doing that's not a sport. That's a game.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, do you think that the fact that a company like owns the game, like nobody owns, basketball or football, like you can just, play it, right? But for esports, Valve owns Counter-Strike. League of Legends is owned by Riot. Do you think that that's something that like that hurts like its ability to grow, or is that an asset, or what? How do you feel about that?
That clearly hurts the ability of that to grow. If I had to really super explain this, I would go off a little bit because it's so that's kind of big. If you're talking to me about that in general, the way I would answer it definitively, um, but beyond, I can make an argument for this beyond a shadow of a doubt, reasonable doubt. It's just this just is like it's bad. Um, the thing is though, like so let's look at this. I'm gonna go there a little bit so you guys can see. So let's take a real sport. It is possible that government can make laws to outlaw export, right? So basketball is outlawed unless sanctioned by us.
Yeah,
Now, if we look at that in the real world, whatever sport that happens in would clearly suffer,
yeah,
right? So kids play in the park. Oh, you can't play that until you play government parks, and it's going to be inefficient and it's going to affect the quality of the sport.
yeah,
And even if we look at a um, so somebody might say, well, the Romans used to have gladiators sponsored by the government. Yeah, they had like a big one sponsored by the emperor, but there was lots of other pits, and other guys like had their own like stables where they like trained and like raised gladiators and stuff like that and scouted them. It was very private and very competitive, and no one really had a full monopoly because there was other parts where people did the same thing or it was just private owned arenas.
yeah,
So again, it's like the sports that do well are something that's already there, and then the government goes onto it and latches onto it. It's not like in the beginning. Now, a government's basically a giant corporate body.
yeah,
Corpus, just look up the word corpus. So when you're looking at it, like it's bad when you have this one power over looking over everything, going, yeah, you have to follow our rules and only our input. So it limits the amount there's a word for this. I don't know why I'm messing up today. I'm like really like I
you're
don't know.
miking it up, man. You're miking it up. I'm
Oh
rubbing off
gosh,
on
I
you.
I don't know. I'm tired. Like I just like I know the word and I can't say it up my mouth. It's weird. I'm really tired.
Welcome to my world.
Oh gosh. But certain games would be more prolific, and then the overall market would be better. But that would improve competition. So, and this comes back to a fundamental thing: is that these companies, I don't mind them starting it, but should they have these properties forever, infinite? No, that's a copyright problem. So it just
Yeah,
those are clear problems, and they should only be like at most 14 years anyway. So and then it should go to everyone. But like if another company wanted to do it, like if other little kids could start up their own stuff or people could open it up, then the sport could develop. Let's just say it's a sport, because basketball didn't just happen because one person owned it. There was a lot of different variations of basketball. A lot of people playing basketball, like
yeah,
like so basketball tried to copy park rules and then went away, and then this company started doing this better than this company, or then they merged and stuff. When you only have one stuff, it's really hard to grow something. So, right, unless you're perfect, and then even if the manager is perfect, when he dies or retires, doesn't mean the other people are going to be perfect. So, energetic has these things he calls letters that he responds to certain companies, right? And one of them, and we've talked about this for years, is Capcom. I don't support any of these companies anymore because they don't give you what you want. They're not listening to people. They like right, like if you look at with Capcom and stuff like that, they have these properties and they're just super wide properties that no one can touch or they use because you have to now make Mighty Number Nines and stuff like that or whatever. And the problem is that all those other games are different now, and they're not the same property. So we can't take the best of Mega Man because we have so many variations of Mega Man now, like Mega Man, Mega Man Legends, Mega Man X, right? We can't make the best Mega Man, right? We can't do
yeah.
these things to make like to develop it better. So I think that it's like I'm touching right now. I'm not trying to definitively answer it beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt. I'm just touching on aspects so people could think about it a certain way, right? Later because it's such a big thing. I might write something on this, but it's
Well,
really tough. Like, and I think that it really does hurt it, and it's really hard to grow a sport, even if it was a sport, when it's monopolized by any corpus.
mm, okay. So, like, as a minor point, then like by what you're telling me, like Riot Games, the owner of League of Legends, they made a decision to actually like, instead of having independent leagues, basically they monopolize the all the biggest teams into their league, and are kind of like they have a top down approach to managing esports, which according to the people who own a lot of the biggest esports teams, they do like the stability, but like, do you think that that's gonna like cost them in the long run, the fact that they're managing these leagues from like so top heavy, that you don't have as much like different tournaments and different experimentations like in the market and stuff, or
Exactly. So you just said the key word. You're limiting the market. You're interfering with how the market should flow. So you see this in anything in any market, and markets are everywhere because markets are created by us, right? There's markets are created by sentient things. People think about them as this abstract thing, like the supermarket, the store. They're created by sentient people. Without sentient things, markets cannot exist. I'm not saying
mm-hmm.
about a building. It's not a building. Literally, markets are exchanges. And so if you take in the gene market and just naturally how things, there's something called free gene flow,
Yeah,
environmental and free environmental gene flow, where genes are flowing freely between a species or interspecies, like through bacteria and viruses and stuff like that. These things are normal, so they compete in right. They have to compete,
yeah,
right? When you have a game, look at basketball. Look how much basketball. Look at the development of basketball. It's amazing. It's still developing. Or football,
yeah,
because it's the same game that nobody fully owns. There's leagues that are very powerful, right? But nobody fully owns basketball.
yeah,
And so what happens is that, like, because like people could play it on their own and play with their own rules, they could take the best of or bring the elements into the game, like into like the league, or the league adopts those things. But when you fully own something, an idea, right? That's what we're saying. It's very hard for this experimentation to happen with that system, with that specific system, because you have to now make a different system that's similar, but it's still, the rules are different, and that makes a big impact. If you go into basketball and you play by the different rules of different eras, the game changes drastically.
yeah,
It changes drastically. Like this year, the Golden State Warriors are hot, but if you play by the rules of past eras, they wouldn't be this hot.
yeah,
The game, the rules change the game because the guy would get punched in the face. It changes the game drastically.
yeah,
So, and this is the thing. So if I made my own version of whatever games Riots are doing, it changes how the game. It changes the feel of the game and how we develop stuff. So it's a hard thing. Like there's industries that are good, like they develop because of like say real time strategy industry or something like that. You could have development in the industry, but a particular sport, quote unquote, is super hard to develop because from a top down approach. Like people can't experiment and practice and do new things on their own. So like it's difficult for them to pick it up. That's why sports that do well are the sports where that are the cheapest to play. So
yeah,
basketball as well because it's really cheap and easy to play. Football as well. Either football, American football, or the global brand of football is relatively cheap to play. Because why football is the hardest, American football is the hardest. You get a bunch of kids, you get a ball, and they play. Like they have flagged football and all that kind of stuff like that, but they still play it without it. Games that require like all of this stuff to play are usually less popular. Of course, it's
no,
not a golden magical hard rule, but that's generally how things develop. There's
I
more for
think
premium in that game.
I think that there a similar principle like is true in esports. Like the biggest games, like it in esports are have two things in common. Like if you just look at the player base, they're free to play, and they have like low specs, so you could run them on like low quality machines. So basically, like anyone who has like a simple laptop can play the games. Like the high, you know, the high resolution, like super detailed games tend not to be the games that end up being the biggest like esports titles.
Oh yeah, yeah, I could see that
Mm.
because what we're talking about are principles that are true of markets,
Yeah.
right? So like, and that's a big cosmic thing. So it's hard for these things to me to become popular or even eclipse traditional sports for another reason. And I just think that like I can understand from a profit standpoint why the companies are doing that, but it hurts them. It really does. I mean, it doesn't hurt them; it hurts the sport.
Yeah, it hurts the longevity of it.
Exactly,
That actually
and
brings me
that's a really
to
good. That's a
a
really important thing.
second
Yeah.
question that I had for you, and that was you see games like like Halo, StarCraft, Warcraft 3. At various points, all of these games were the most popular esport, right? Like they had the most views, they had the most sponsorships, the most money, the biggest cash prizes, all of that. And at some point, they went through a massive fall, and they don't even exist as like competitive games to that degree anymore, almost completely, right? You have a few games like Super Smash Brothers Melee and Counter Strike, which were able to like come back and be successful again. I guess what I want to ask you is, are these games like destined to all like boom and bust, or is there a chance that we could get games that would be stable over a long, like the long term?
Okay, that's a weird question.
Okay,
The reason why it's weird is because the end you start talking about booming and busting, and
I'm sorry.
implicit in that is this idea that we have that a lot of people have that's weird and makes no sense that these economic cycles should not happen. Like
Well, it's
and
not so
actually
much.
that needs to happen. That's normal. That's healthy.
It's not so much that I don't think that it should cycle, but it seems that a lot of these games go from being at the top to not even existing as
So you're talking about volatility.
yeah.
You're saying that there's too much volatility in the game market and that it needs to stable out more to
Yeah,
have
I
less
was
volatility, or you're talking about economic cycles because you're using the word boom and bust. And
okay.
so we could apply that to a lot of different types of markets because economics is based off scarcity. So
Yeah.
there's scarcity all the time. You just depend on how creative you are. And so like when you're talking about that, like yeah, that's good. Like economic cycles are good.
Yeah.
Like that's how you know when you're messing up. Like, oh well,
Yeah.
we could do this better. That's how you get better and better over time.
Yeah.
Like if you don't know what's wrong, like then you don't fix it. Like
Yeah.
you don't want to keep doing a bad thing forever.
Yeah. No, I get where you're coming from. I guess what I really want to know is, do you think that in the future it'll get less volatile, like these games might last longer at the top, because a lot of these games, their success was very short lived. Maybe like within a year, their viewership goes from millions to like a couple thousand.
Okay, so I remember talking about this with you way back, and games like chess and stuff like that are stable, and I had better. I don't know why my brain was way faster. I'm just slow right now, like comparatively for me, and I'm tired today with all this stuff. But games like chess are very stable because, like, I basically answered this. You heard me talk about this a lot, and the casual market's not the important market. It's
Okay.
the hardcore market. It's the
Okay.
people that like it a lot,
Okay.
right? That's what determines the longevity of something.
Okay.
So it's the how much people like it that are hardcore, and then how how well do you is this scalable? So if it's at a scale, right, or a level that's unsustainable with with the base that it has, the hardcore base, then it can't exist. It has to now break down, right? To reach a scale where it could generate profit. You
I
see what
do.
I mean? Like if there's ten
Yeah.
thousand people that enjoy X game or whatever, and they spend $30 on it, and the company costs like I don't know $1 trillion a year, it clearly can't exist
Yeah.
off that. It has to expand. But but then if it tries to go to the casual market, the problem with the casual market is that there's trends.
Yeah.
There's like fashion trends. So it's gonna go out of style and then they can't make that money. This is a problem with video games in general because video games are now too expensive. They're getting more and more expensive and there's all these other things that are going on that are literally like it's a bubble and it's going to blow. There's multiple mini bubbles within a bigger bubble, which is a problem. It's gonna be huge. It's gonna pop like crazy. It's gonna be pop, 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 and it's like once it blows like that, it'll never be the same again. Because we don't have any. Because like we learn and we're trained to believe that things must be to scale. No, things that are viable are built for redundancy. All things that are super viable and durable are redundant. Your body is redundant. Everything that lives longer is super redundant. So that's these those are like answers to that if you want to look at it like an essence for something to exist and thrive is like amateurism, right? For a
Yeah.
sport, you need amateurs.
Yeah.
And when you go to like a park where you play pickup basketball or football, there's a field or a park or someplace people can play. One of the fundamental problems with e-games is that there's no park or places you can play because they shut down servers. So
Yeah.
there's no way for you to pay for that or donate money to keep those things going as they want to go because people literally are forced to migrate from games. Like the companies force them to migrate because they can't make money because it's too durable. You understand? So
Yeah.
if they make a really good game, it's too durable and they can no longer make money. The
Yeah.
model that they have is flawed, right? So inherently it goes back to that it's a game. It's not like a sport. So we're trying to make games into these leagues and these tournaments, but it's really hard to do that electronically when there's no like place that's open forever.
Yeah.
On console gaming, do you kind of see what I mean? Even on computer game is a little better because you have rooms that are open for like a long time, right? But the problem with that is that those niche markets are not big enough for
Yeah.
them to get the profits that they want. So
Yeah.
now they have to go super mainstream, and mainstream people don't really care like that. So it comes back to the size. Comics and stuff like that are healthy and thrive not because of all the people that like the movies right now. It's because of the core comic or geek or nerd, whatever alternative words you want to say. That fan base has grown, just in general, because they
Yeah.
consume more products as they've aged and have their own kids and bring their own kids up. There's actually a bigger group than it was before. So those people just supporting their whatever they like actually makes a lot of money. Most of the guys in the corporate suits don't know how to relate to those people, so they go off and they're like catering to like the greater casual market. But if we saw the success of Deadpool, they're enough. That's all you really need. So those guys are showing up and selling it out, and then they bring their girlfriends or their friends and their family, and that's why it does well. And then it catches on, and then we all talk about it. There's variable and there's fixed, and the variable people are kind of like insecure. They're not sure, and if they see you liking something consistently, they'll mess with it every now and then, and that's where you get those ebbs and those spikes. But you got to keep your core base happy. And the problem with this, with esports, and just like with these with these corporate gaming companies, is that they're not keeping their core base happy.
Yeah.
If that makes sense to you, and
Yeah. That
that's a
makes sense to me.
problem from having too much power. It's like a governmental problem. It's a similar thing, right? When we look at it in politics in the real world, that's a similar power problem we see throughout history.
Yeah.
And that comes back to the fact that they should not have this copyright power. If you took away the copyright power, it would be now esports would have a better chance to survive and thrive. There's
Yeah.
a couple of laws that need to be changed just in general to go back to people, and then maybe that could start being okay. But right now, it's like it's there's inherent problems to even making it get to the level of chess or something like that. You like like chess, you could just play and the amateurs and people play at a park and something. It's really easy. You can have chess games for a long time. Just leave the board where it is. You need these guys to have servers.
Yeah.
Because it's illegal for you to not go through them. And
Yeah.
if they feel like they don't want to hold it anymore, they're making bad moves and they're going to bankrupt themselves, it's gone.
Yeah.
And all that's gone. And then the migration of systems and stuff, and then upselling of stuff, and it's just there's just it's too fashion like for it to like have the viability for it to develop properly. That's
Yeah.
what I mean.
Yeah. I got you, man. I appreciate that. That was that really answered a lot of good questions that I had, man. Thank you for that.
It was pretty wide, so I mean, I tried to talk about it in a way that if you guys think about it, it will give you guys a lot of insight into coming up with the answers yourselves. Uh, I know you asked me about this stuff a lot, right? And so there's like stuff maybe if you guys like it, I'll write about it and answer stuff specifically in a series, so it's easier for me to do short stuff so you guys could like see it or read it, and that would be more robust totally for that gaining of wisdom on these topics. But some of the questions, if I really want to answer and prove it, which can be proven beyond the shadow of a doubt, it would just take far too long because they're so big and there's so many variables at play that are not properly like defined in the first place, and there's no sources for that because no one defined them yet. Well, in this medium.
Okay, thank you very much. This has been Absolute Zero, Defender of the Universe. And I'll we'll definitely be seeing you soon with more videos.
And thank you
Um
guys very much. It's me, RJ Knight, and check out Energetics. His letter series. He also has some really cool polls for animanga, and we're still going to be trying to do some of the get back to animanga talks and doing keeping them open and also closed segments. So you guys can stop by, check us out anytime. We like it like that. Thank you guys so much for this session of Absolute Answers and RJ Responses.